Today we're going to be doing a live. I'm trying it from my laptop, so I hope that the sound is good. I hope that the video is okay. I tried to do it from my phone, but I have an older phone now that I've kind of broken my last phone, so I've gone back to using an old phone and it did not seem to want to go live. So this is what we're going to be doing. So we're doing this. Hi there. So today we're going to be doing Psychologist Autocomplete challenge. I don't know if it's a challenge. I hope you can hear me. I hope the quality of the video is okay. I'm using my laptop today for the first time, doing a live. I tried to do it the other day and it wasn't very successful. So here goes nothing. So we're going to do Psychologist Autocorrect. So we're going to do, let's start with, what does a psychologist do? So basically, a psychologist is someone who's been trained in doing a variety of things. So there's forensic psychologists, applied psychologists, organizational psychologists, clinical psychologists. And so basically, psychologists is just basically working with people. And a lot of times, sometimes they're not even working with people, they're working with research. And so there's a lot of things that a psychologist can do. They can do therapy, they can do research, they can do they can do assessments, statistics. There's so many things a psychologist can do. So that question is a little bit hard to answer because it's very broad. Okay, what does a psychologist do? What does a psychopath mean? So a psychopath, even though we don't say that word anymore too much in psychology, is someone who has psychopathic tendencies, and they tend to be persons who are very good at manipulating. The other word we usually say is sociopath. So sociopath is someone who seems relatively normal, but they don't have the capacity to like feel remorse. They don't engage with their emotions. They are very good at pretending to be quite normal, but they tend to have sadistic ways of operating. So a sociopath or like a psychopath, as you know, Jack the Ripper, Hannibal Lecter, those kinds of persons, they're kind of psychopaths. So they may have had troubled backgrounds as children. They may have come from abusive homes. They may have a really negative view of themselves and the world around them. They may not trust people, and they really have poor impulse control. And so these things would have been happening throughout their childhood and kind of continued. No one just wakes up a psychopath. So that's one thing. Good. What does, why would, let's try with the why. Why would a psychologist, why would you see a psychologist? Good question. You would see a psychologist, let's narrow it down, a counseling psychologist like me, because probably more than likely you have some kind of mental health issue. You may have a hard time managing stress. You might even need my support in vocational counseling, which is basically helping you decide or figure out what career path to even go into. You might need psychotherapy. There are some psychologists who can also prescribe medication, especially like in the UK. You might need prescriptions that way. Not very common and doesn't happen in Guyana. But you may also need someone to talk to about couples therapy. Your child might be having behavioral issues. You might be a parent who needs an assessment done on your child, your mother, an elderly parent, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of things a lot of reasons why you might want to see a psychologist, especially a counseling psychologist. Why would a psychologist refer someone to a psychiatrist, right? So why would a psychologist, refer you to a psychiatrist? A lot of times when I refer my clients to a psychiatrist, it's because they are in need of psychotropic drugs. A lot of times they may need medication that I can't prescribe them that might be related to like a mood disorder, anxiety disorder, more serious disorders like schizophrenia, that can't and should not be solely treated with talk therapy. You might have mania, and you can sit in a session, and you may need medication to be able to basically calm down. That is, to be calm enough to sit in a session. So that's basically why I refer my clients to a psychiatrist. Why would funniest things come up? Let me see. Do you guys have any questions before I continue with this game, I guess I would call it? Let's see. Let's see if there's any other ones. I opened up incognito on my computer. Let's see. Why would a psychologist, now you guys can hear me typing, want to talk to the media? Ooh, that's an intense question. Why would the psychologist want to talk to the media? Psychologists, we have to be very careful when talking to the media. It depends on what. Like, so this is the media, social media. I talk to you guys to help with education and awareness. We would not typically talk to the media about like a case, or an ongoing like criminal investigation, that kind of thing. So really, if a psychologist talking to the media, more than likely they're just doing education, basic education and basic awareness. That's what I would say for why would a psychologist want to talk to the media. Let's see what else is here. I already answered, why would a child see a psychologist? Why would you go to a psychologist? Why would someone need a psychologist? How would a psychologist, let's try that. How would a psychologist measure implicit racism? How would a psychologist measure implicit racism? That's a very good question, which I have not thought about how to ever answer. I think if I had a client come into therapy because that they had experienced racism, I would probably go through and again, this is just a psychology therapy I use. I mean, I would want to understand emotionally, psychologically, physically, and so on, how that impacted them to have experienced racism. And actually, I really do want to do a video on racism, particularly about racism we see in Guyana. So I'm just waiting for the best time. So that's what I would say about how would we treat racism. How might a psychologist doing basic science? What is a dog psychologist? I don't know. What does a school psychologist do? So like a school psychologist would be someone who works specifically with schools. They've been trained to in school psychology. They're trained in guidance counseling. They might be trained in child development, developmental psych. They might be trained how to do assessments for behavioral issues related to children. So a child psychologist, school psychologist is very important. They may also do vocational counseling as well, whereby they also want to help the child figure out, what field works best for them, what courses to do, what subjects to do when they get to university, and obviously deal with immediate issues, behavioral issues in the school environment. Good. How would a psychologist be? What would a social psychologist be most likely to study? Social psychologists basically are psychologists that study people and society and social interactions, social beings, how people are social. And so they might be studying racism. They might study gender differences. They might study how patriarchy impacts the workforce. Like there's so many things a social psychologist may study. There was a question earlier about like what would you need to study to be a psychologist? And I think I answered this like 2 years ago, but basically you would do like a first degree in psychology, more than likely, or even social work. And then you would do a master's in some form of psychology. So a master's of science of counseling psych, like me, clinical psych, applied psych, forensic psych, and so on. And then if you are in the first world, such as the UK or Canada, to be a psychologist, you would then do your PhD or even doctorate of psychology within the society. So that is basically what you would study to become a psychologist. How can a psychologist become a psychiatrist? Great question. I think the times when a psychologist may transfer to psychiatry is given that you have your diploma, your first degree, your master's, say you don't have your PhD yet, I assume you would have to start doing like psychiatric types of courses and then kind of transition completely into a PhD with psychiatry. And even then, I think you would still have to take up like medical courses, pharmacology courses, science courses. I don't think the transition is as easy as we think. Oh, psychologist, psychiatrist, they're the same. The transition is not as easy from a psychologist to a psychiatrist, but can a psychiatrist become a psychologist? Yes. It's a bit easier, I think, because you just need to do like maybe training or like a master's in counseling psych, and you can kind of just transition across. Whereas because psychiatry has science attached to it, we can't really just pop over and start prescribing meds, right? So that's a major difference. Okay, what would a psychologist, how would a psychologist, who would a psychologist work with? Now, again, very broad, very broad. A psychologist would work anywhere, anywhere. I think psychology should be in everywhere and anything. So they can work in schools, we can work in NGOs like me, we can work in our own offices, we can work in hospitals, communal clinics, community clinics. We can work in like high-level agencies like IDB, UN, PAHO, World Health Organization. We can work in corporate businesses. So if a corporate business has an EAP, so an employment assistant program or employment aid program, you can have a psychologist. Like I'm attached to an EAP program here in Guyana with a foreign company. And so it just depends. They're everywhere though. We should be everywhere. There's psychologists that work specifically with like even like HR. Like I think people who work in HR should have training in like people management. I mean, that's a part of your job, your human resources staff. So even things like human resources, we're in marketing. Psychology is everywhere, people. It's everywhere. Who would a counseling psychologist work with? I already said that. I work with like basically everyone. The only times I don't work with cases is because it's out of my competency, and so that would be persons who suffer with like extreme like delusional disorders, schizophrenia, neuropsychological disorders, so even things like dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. I don't have any training in those things. Memory, even memory testing, don't have that capacity. Someone asked me to do a memory test on their family member. The person was 75, and I was like, I'm not the best person for this. Let me get you someone who may be. Diagnostic testing, also not really trained so much in that. We've done psychometric testing. That's slightly different. And psychometric testing is basically testing for, oh Lord, there's cognitive psychometric testing, there's personality psychometric testing. It's a lot. Very interesting, very interesting. The reports are death, but it's interesting to say the least. I've done psychometrics 1 and 2, so cognitive and personality, and the personality tests were definitely interesting, as well as the cognitive, to be quite honest, especially if you're doing cognitive tests on children. Very interesting to see the way they think. Sometimes I'm silently doing cognitive tests on people and kids sometimes, actually. Right. Let's see, when would a psychologist when would a psychologist use naturalistic observation? Naturalistic observation, from what I can remember, like this is like Psych 1010. Basically, it's observing people in their natural state. Basically, what it sounds like. That I believe. And so, why would we use naturalistic observation? Now, I think a lot of psychologists, at least I, am constantly using naturalistic observation. So I am watching the way you come into the office, the way you sit. I am particularly observing when you're meeting like as a couple or family. I look at where everyone's sitting. I look at their body language. But the term naturalistic observation is used when I think doing sample research. And so you're basically watching people in their natural environment. So you know, like those YouTubers who do like pranking or try to see like if people will respond to like a man hitting a woman versus a woman hitting a man. So that's a mixture of like naturalistic observation, as well as someone who might do an assessment like that would be someone like a behavioral or even social psychologist. So yeah, very exciting stuff. When would a psychologist use a correlational study? So correlational study is a type of study. There's different, but correlation is really, we always say correlation is not causation. So I can say that these two things correlate, which means they connect or they are working in unison, but that one didn't cause the other. And so basically correlation study is when you have to find whether this thing beyond naturalistic observation correlates, and you have to use statistics. So that's just, again, it's basically a study that you would use. And so it just depends. If you're a statistical psychologist or someone who specializes in statistics, you would use a correlational study. I do not do research in that capacity, so don't quote me on it. Okay, last question. Who, what, when, where? Where would you gain experience to be a psychologist? Okay, great last question. Where would you gain experience to become a psychologist? And I think this is important because I have had this question kind of posed to me indirectly, whereby someone was looking for an agency to go to use their skills of counseling, but had no background whatsoever in psychology. And basically, the sad thing about it is that you really have to do counseling or to be a psychologist. Or let's answer the question in particular. Let me see the question again. Where would you gain experience to be a psychologist? The place you're going to gain experience to become a psychologist is when you're in your degree. That's just quite honestly in your master's. You might volunteer in like NGOs or Red Cross or an elderly home and any of these kinds of things when you're, before you do a degree. But the reality is we don't look at that as experience to become a psychologist. We talk about that as being life experiences. That's great. When you're in your interview for your master's, they actually remember being asked, what sets you apart from your colleagues for this? And I was very honest. I said, and it really shouldn't have mattered, but it did, in the sense of, I said, profession so and so. I said, I think what sets me apart from my colleagues is that I have been involved in counseling in three very distinct ways. I have been the counselor, informal counselor. I've been the assistant to a counselor when I was doing social work. So I was like a junior counselor kind of when I was doing social work. And last but not least, I have been a client. I know what it's like to sit across from that person, not knowing who they are and whether they think you're crazy or if they're judging you, and being nervous and hoping for the best. And I said, honestly, I may have just shot myself in the foot. I said, but I really wish I don't have to say that. And that's because of stigma. And I said, the reality is, like, I know what it's like. And I don't know if that was the reason, but I got it. I'm not saying to use that as a thing in your interview, but I'm just saying it worked for me, at least, along with probably other things. But that's just kind of the reality. We kind of just have to, like, you can do all these great things, but nothing prepares you fully for being a psychologist until you're like sitting in the classroom, and then you have to do practical work either in front of your colleagues or sitting in therapy, resolving your own issues, or in your internship where you're gonna probably have to complete at least like 1,000 hours. So that's just the reality to be a counseling psychologist. Of course, if you want to be like a research psychologist, you can always, the more research projects you do, the better. The more writing you do, the better. If you want to be a PhD kind of psychologist where it's academia, go ahead, write all the articles, do all the correlational studies and stuff like that. But to be like a counseling psychologist or a clinical psychologist, the way you gain experience to become that is in your master's, at minimum. I don't know many undergrad programs that gives you that opportunity, because we don't know where you're going. When you do a first degree in psych, we don't know where you're going. You could be going to research, you can be going to forensics, you can be going to applied. So we can't just be like, oh, just do counseling, because we don't know that's what you want to do with your psychology degree. So that's that. I'm going to stop with the questions now because I feel like it was a lot. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm seeing some people said that they're sharing. Thank you for that. Oh, good. Melissa, I hope I pronounced that right. Great job. Thank you. Kelly said, yep, the sound is good. Thank you, Madeira. I don't see any questions, but do let me know if there's anything to post in the comment section. I'll get back to you. Last thing, this Saturday at 5 p.m., I think I put it on the wall, Swag and Mag Life are doing an emotional wellness webinar, and your girl is doing the emotional wellness aspect. It's just going to be about an hour, and it's from 5 to 6, and it's going to be on Zoom, so you can always get the Zoom ID and password from the poster, and you can join in. I'm trying to make it as interactive as possible while still staying in the time limit and with trying to stay focused and trying to be engaging while using a PowerPoint and sharing screen. So wish me luck, but hope you'll be there. We're going to be covering, basically what is emotional wellness, how does it impact you when you're not emotionally well, and how can we improve your emotional wellness. Okay, have a good night, guys. Hopefully I will see you all on Saturday at 5 p.m. Check the wall. It has the ID and password. Have a great night. Have a great weekend. Stay safe. Use sanitizer. Don't touch people. Have a good time.